let's start there. What are the chances that we will know the president by the end of election night?
It's not high, but it is possible. I mean, the truth is that if Florida, if we can announce Florida on election night, then whoever wins Florida is pretty much in very very good shape. So we'll know a lot if we can announce Florida. But that's only probable if there's one candidate that has a pretty sizable lead. If it's close, it might take Florida, a day or two, and then if that if it's not clear after that, we might end up having to watch Pennsylvania count their ballots for a week.
Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, those are the states that we really have our eyes on, right? For waiting to see possibly days who they've decided.
Yeah, in the southern states, we're going to watch Florida, North Carolina, and out west we'll watch Arizona. But up in the Northeast, we're going to be watching Pennsylvania and Wisconsin in particular, maybe a little bit of Michigan. The advantage is in a state like Florida, right? They start tabulating the votes when they receive them, so it doesn't take quite as long to count them. In Pennsylvania, for example, they don't open the mail-ins until election day. So if it's up to Pennsylvania, we might be watching them, which would be a nice break, to watch another state besides Florida.
Have it be someone else's problem instead of ours. So there's been a lot of litigation over the past few months, or the past year, during the pandemic, about the new ways that we're voting this year and trying to figure all of this out. Generally speaking, do Democrats want more votes to be counted and Republicans want less?
I mean, that's the narrative, and there is some evidence to back that up. Right, the Democrats have been fighting for more expansive rules to, for example, to allow ballots that are cast before election day and arrive after election day to be decounted, and Republicans have generally opposed those kinds of things. It's very tricky this particular year because with the pandemic and the huge surge in mail-in voting, we face some challenges in translating people's votes and into getting them counted properly a little bit differently than has been typical. So it's been a little harder this year, and so you've seen parties really pushing very hard to make sure that the voters that are supporting that party are going to make sure that they get their votes counted.
And how much do we run the risk of the fact that this election is unlike any other, and there has been so many new things, whether it be we've got ballot vans now, and there are these boxes, and there's so many different things now that at the end, if the losing party is angry at how this all went and will start opening up lawsuits to try to challenge the election.
Yeah, it's a long tradition in the United States, and one of the things that sort of makes us stand out among the rest of the world that we have peaceful transfers of power. Like when one party wins, the other party accepts defeat, and they compete the next time. And we hope in the United States that we're able to continue that tradition. It's important. It's sort of the base stability for our democracy. With that said, I mean, I think where you're going to have the most problems is if the election is particularly close. If it comes down to a few thousand ballots, which is unlikely but not impossible, right? Most of us were around here in 2000 when we had 537 ballot difference out of 6 million cast. But when it's really close, then the parties start looking really hard at some of the ballots that were rejected, some of the ballots that might have arrived late, and they start arguing over which ballots are eligible and which ballots are not eligible. This could affect the outcome. I mean, hopefully we won't end up in the situation where people are holding ballots up to a light again, trying to see like we did in 2000 where the Chad was pushed or not. But if it's close, I think you're going to expect both parties will fight very, very hard to make sure that the ballots that they think should be counted will get counted.
If we don't know, though, and now we are counting ballots in the days following Election Day, does that necessarily show that something is wrong? Senator Scott, 2 years ago, when there was more counting of the ballots, began to, say that it's a huge conspiracy. We have to make sure that this is, something is going wrong here. If we don't know on Tuesday night, is something wrong?
Not necessarily. And you have to remember what is very different this year is the huge volume of mail-in balloting, which is a little harder to count than the same day election balloting, which is, just put in the machine, that they have to be opened and counted and tabulated. And if it's very close, they want to make sure they get it right. So because it takes a few days, if it does take a few days, doesn't necessarily mean there's any malfeasance whatsoever. In fact, I'd suggest to you that there's very little evidence of malfeasance in our voting historically. I mean, we're pretty good at having open and fair elections in the United States. I think the expectation that we're not going to have that, I think, is wrong. I mean, things can happen, and we should make sure that we watch our voting carefully and we make sure that it's done fairly and openly. But I think that it's better to presume that we're doing it right because we have historically done it right than just to assume that because it takes a little longer, we're doing something wrong.
Yet there is a narrative out there that there's a lot of malfeasance and there's foreign interference. And a lot of people are worried that the narrative could possibly infect the voting system. That if we don't know, on Tuesday night, that people are going to begin to lose faith in our system.
Yeah, I mean, we should separate two things, right? One is sort of the all the things going on around actual balloting, news stories and social media, and there is good and solid evidence that bad actors are attempting to influence American voters. The U.S. government has sort of warned us about that, for some time now. So, I mean, that is true, and there's a different sort of way to deal with that is that don't just believe everything you read online, right? Make sure you confirm your sources, get them from reputable sources. There's all kinds of ways to try and minimize that. The other question is whether there's something actually systematically wrong in our voting. In other words, people are changing votes or people are voting illegally. On that, I mean, I hope I can reassure people there isn't really much evidence of that at all in the United States history. We generally speaking, there have been some cases where people have been prosecuted for doing something wrong related to balloting, but it's so rare. It's a tiny percentage of the amount of ballots that have been cast. People should have a little more faith in our system because it has worked pretty well.
Um, we didn't know too much about the threat of foreign interference or the foreign interference that happened in 2016 until way after the election. We already know that some foreign interference has happened so far in this election. Could evidence of that lead the losing party to challenge the results?
Probably not. I mean, if there was question of somebody sort of hacking into a system and changing votes, I mean that would put it in doubt. But we know that third party actors, that foreign governments, we know I think the government recently we got an announcement that Iran and Russia were both attempting to sort of influence our election, and to some degree in the world that we live in, there's going to be some of that no matter what, and it's going to be happening probably a lot in the future as countries become more sophisticated at it. The answer to that is for us to be more sophisticated in how we respond to it. Short of changing actual votes, you'll get parties that will complain, and obviously, if you're the victim of a foreign country sort of putting out bad information about you, people are going to complain about it, and rightly so, I would say. But ultimately, as long as Americans are getting a free choice about who to vote for, I think people will respect the outcome.
I'm going to feed into a Democratic nightmare here. I know that that you've heard this, that people are worried that we're not going to have enough ballots in to call the election on election night, and that the president is going to call himself the victor, and that he won't leave no matter what the actual results are. Is there anything that will allow him to keep himself in the Oval Office, even if after a couple days or even a couple weeks shows that he did not win?
Well, the president and the vice president's term end on January 20th. So if the president is not reelected, he will no longer be president after that date. We can imagine a lot of different scenarios where things go wrong, where states don't report their electoral votes, where electors are unfaithful to the voters that elected them and they choose a different candidate. There's a lot of possible things that could conceivably go wrong, but I don't think that should be the center where people are focused. For the most part, we've managed to make it through with this system for some time, and and I think we will make it through this time. But I mean, if people are concerned, the most important thing for them to do is to go vote, make sure that their voice is being heard. I don't think it's too valuable for us to sort of play out very, very unlikely scenarios and try and figure out what happens if something that is so unlikely to happen happens.
When was the last time we had a rogue elector?
Yeah, yeah, actually, that happens more than you might think, which is somebody that votes for a candidate other than the one that won their state. It happened last time. But so far, and here's the good news: so far, it hasn't changed the outcome. In other words, electors we haven't had enough unfaithful electors to make it so that the person who lost won or anything like that. But that does concern me a little bit, about the electoral college, which is, remember, we are not technically voting for a candidate; we're voting for a slate of electors that support that candidate. And yeah, and the translation of that can sometimes not be as exacting as we think it is.
Well, this is 2020, right? And
Yeah,
it could happen.
let's hope that doesn't happen.
Um,
I mean, here's the thing. I've written 2 columns on the Electoral College, and I've written probably 35 columns for the Civics Project, and the 2 that got the most response were people for and against the Electoral College. That is an issue that seems to motivate people a great deal on both sides.
I think my last question is just about, I don't think ever before, certainly since 2016, has there been, uh, have Americans doubted the process as much as they have now. But what you're telling me is Americans have no reason to doubt this process.
Well, I wouldn't say no reason, right? Because nobody's perfect, and I think Floridians especially can go back to the election of 2000 and the hanging chads and pregnant chads, and there are fair complaints about how that election was conducted, how it was ultimately counted, and how it was ultimately determined. And I think it is a healthy thing in a democracy for us always to look at our system and see if there are ways that we can do it better and make sure that people's votes are counted appropriately. With that said, that there's just the larger narrative that there's some kind of great malfeasance that happens, that there are tens of thousands of illegal votes or any of that. There's just no evidence to support that. And if there were, we obviously should do something about that. But there's just, historically, the United States just hasn't had that kind of problem. I mean, I think if we're going to focus on the problems, we should focus on the problems of making sure that people have access to the ballot, and make sure that voting is as seamless and easy for people as it can be. And I think those are legitimate issues. But presumptions that there's some kind of big, illegal vote going on, there's just no evidence to support that.